Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 12 of Project Odyssey. And Jebediah, along with Hadfield in the last episode, had left the moon, and they were heading back. And I had to make an adjustment right there in order to make sure that my periapsis was a little higher in the atmosphere, because I didn't want them coming down so shallow. I think they were around 11,000 meters. And then I figured, well, you know, I've got some extra fuel there, so why don't we burn some of that off? Although we still have that problem with our attitude control systems not really working, but I do my best to keep it pointed using the vectoring on that engine, pointed in the right direction, just to throw a little bit of extra fuel into slowing down our approach. Although I'm afraid, because I couldn't get it pointed in the right direction, that I don't think I got quite enough of what I was trying to get out of there. We are lowering our apoapsis by going through the top of the atmosphere here. However, it wasn't quite enough because of losing that attitude control and not being able to burn my retro engines there in order to slow down more. We're going to end up skimming through the upper atmosphere and making another trip around. And that is going to bring us dangerously close to running out of life support. It is a good thing that the second time through we actually made it, because I don't think they would have made it through a whole nother round trip. There was also a slight glitch in the actual recording. Now you can see here that we've gone through, we're going up to the top of our orbit where we then run out of electricity, but we'll make it down this time. However, there was a glitch I was saying with our actual landing here. Right as I was deploying my parachutes, right about here, it crashed. KSP crashed, and so I was unable to actually get the finishing view there of them coming down for a landing. But imagine, if you will, parachutes on a capsule, and the capsule hits the ground. Okay, well, you've seen that before. I'm not going to try to go and recover that in some way, or I didn't want to reload and try again just to get that little bit there. So instead, when I reloaded KSP, I simply terminated that particular flight and then went back in and un-MIA'd the guys that had, well, Jebediah and Hadfield, because they were the two guys in the capsule there. And whenever you just terminate a flight that's out in the field like that, the guys go missing in action, basically. I guess they're presumed dead. And though we didn't actually see their capsule touch down, if it hadn't crashed, I'm fairly certain it would have. I don't know why the game crashed when I opened parachutes there, but I'm sure it would have been fine. Anyway, now we have been launching here a new satellite. This is the TDRS-D version of a satellite. And the reason why we're sending this one out is we need more communications dishes, and I don't want to fill my skies with a whole bunch of satellites. So instead, I'm going to decommission the TDRS-Cs and use the TDRS-Ds instead, and they have the bunch more satellite dishes on them. Now, what I just got through doing there was I targeted the moon, because the moon is at a perfect 0-degree inclination relative to Kerbin, and that allowed me to see where the ascending and descending nodes were if I had been targeting that 0-degree inclination. And then I was able to make a slight maneuver node that allowed me to see where it would be if I wanted to get that orbit perfectly lined up so that the ascending node there and that orbit were at the same place. That way, when the satellite gets out to that point, I can make my inclination change and my circularization at the exact same time. Now, when I deployed the satellite, I made a little mistake. See where I have my servo controls? One says dish 1, the other says dish 2. Well, the 2 is the speed that I wanted to enter right there, that I just changed to a 2 now. That's what I had originally wanted. That would cause the 2 servos to move open at different rates. One of them opening 1 tick for every 2 ticks of the other dish. So I've closed the dishes back up again, and now I intend to reopen them with my hotkey, but this time, because the dishes there are actually set to 1 and 2, now they're going to open with that iconic look. Now, I tried locking, but still, apparently, robotics here, you can't lock the servos. I don't know if it's just my install or just robotics in general, but I haven't been able to lock those since the 0235 came out. But now everything is pointing where I want it to be, and the only thing left to do is actually get them communicating with the right place. So that you know what it is I'm making them communicate with here, let's go to the VAB where I can explain it in a little bit more detail. The new TDRS-D uses a Gorgon lower stage, and then up here under the fairing, we have ourselves several communications dishes. So let me explain what each of them is going to do. We have this middle ranged one right on the top here. You can open that up just to make it look a little cooler, although it's going to clip. Oh, well, whatever. So you saw what it looked like out there. Let me take the sides off, actually. So those extend out to end up looking like that with the solar panels deployed. And then these ones on the side also end up like that, rotated and pointing out. So the whole thing ends up looking like this. So you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different dishes on here. These are 2 new ones that I've just recently added to my parts. You can see I have 3 new dishes, a 50 gigameter, a 200, and a 500. I don't know when I'm ever going to want the 500, but I figured if I was filling out my dishes, then it was time to just put all the rest of the ones I hadn't used yet in here. Okay, so anyway, I was saying this top one here, this one is going to be used because, recall, that one is the 100 megameter. That one is going to be used in order to talk to Minmus. Then we have a 20 megameter that can talk to the moon, and another 20 megameter that will talk to the other TDRS satellite that's on the opposite side of the planet from this one. And that leaves us the 2 new large 50 gigameter dishes. Now those I'm going to have pointing at 2 deep space relay satellites that will allow me to bounce my signal around the sun. Let me go show you what I mean by that. Alright, here we are. You can see Kerbin right there, and you can see Duna here. Now, imagine for a moment that we want to communicate with Duna. What happens if Duna, for whatever reason, during its trip around the sun, happens to be right here? The sun would block our ability to communicate with it. And the way I'm going to get around that is I'm going to send a couple deep space relay satellites, one out in front of Kerbin over here and one behind Kerbin over here, that I will bounce my signal from the TDRS satellite out to that and then down across to Duna. Now do you see what happened right there? Moho is in the way. So if it just so happened that we had the sun here blocking our communication directly from Kerbin, and Moho blocking this side, well, maybe the one over here would still be able to communicate. And that's why I'm going to put one on each side of Kerbin. They're actually going to be in orbits that are around the sun with the same orbital period as Kerbin itself. This is similar to what I did with the moon, where I put them at L4 and L5, those Lagrange points at the moon, and I'm going to do something like that here. And while we're here, why don't we take a quick look at Duna so I can show you my long-term plan there as well. We're going to need communications if we're going to do anything remotely, so the same sort of thing that we do around Kerbin is what we'll do here. We're going to have to worry about Ike. Ike might sometimes block communication. If we had satellites in here, Ike could actually block communication quite easily with the stuff that we have back toward Kerbin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some satellites, a couple of them, that are out beyond the orbit of Ike, which means they'll never be blocked. And then I'll have some more that are down closer, which means that whichever one gets the communication on either side of Duna outside Ike, they'll be able to communicate with the ones that are on the inside, and then I'll have full communications. So now back here, we can point 2 of the dishes, one of them at Moon, one of them at Minmus, but we don't actually have the other TDRS-D to point at, and the 2 large satellite dishes, we don't have the deep space communications relays even launched yet, so we'll have to take care of those other ones later. For now, we're just getting up to our apoapsis, where we can do that maneuver that I told you about. We'll circularize and change our inclination to make sure it's 0 at the same time. And as I usually do when this does get all the way out as far as I want it, and I have that 6-hour orbital period, I make sure that it's exactly right using little taps of RCS. There, 1 satellite down.
Hello, Neil. I'm reporting for my medical exam, as ordered. Oh, hey, Jeb. Yeah, just give me a moment. I have to run this sample, and then I'll get right with you. Hi, guys. I'm here for my medical exam, as I was ordered. Ooh, what's this? All that? Just some phosphorescent vegetation native only to this Kerbin. Alright, so this sample is done. Jebediah, let's get a look at you. You guys feeling okay after your trip back? Feeling great. Good, good. Well, let's get over here and put you up on the table and we'll get you all checked out. You too, Hadfield. Get on that middle scanner for a more thorough check. Okay, that's it. You guys are both done. Jebediah, you can hop down off that table. You're all cleared to go back to active duty. Alright, thanks, Neil. I'll see you later. Now, Hadfield, I'd like you to stick around for just a little bit longer. I have a couple more tests I'd like to run.
Okay, so the next launch that's coming up here, I want to get a satellite over to Duna that will allow me to start communicating with anything in the future that I might want to send over to Duna. And we are probably right around the end of our launch window right now. This is the opportunity to take our launch straight from the surface right to Duna, and that's why I'm needing to launch here a little bit at night. It's just past sunset, and we're lifting off, and we're going to head up into, we're not even going to go into an orbit. We're going straight from here, straight onto an escape trajectory that'll take us right over to Duna. The satellites inside there, and I say satellite with an S, satellites, there's two of them. They are going to provide the longer range, the outside Ike range communications for Duna, and later I'll send another set of satellites that will actually do the up close to Duna communications. Now, if you happen to be remembering that Jeb or Krantz or someone said in a previous episode that we had missed the launch window, what he actually meant by that was we missed the launch window to have everything prepared to go ourselves and colonize the surface in order to start doing that archaeological dig. However, it is not too late to get some communication satellites on their way. Since we already have our TDRS-D in orbit and ready to communicate with our new satellites that are going up to do all of this, we're going to launch this one now to get this one on its way, and then we're just going to let it go over the next year or so. While it makes its way over there, we'll be launching the extra satellites we need in order to communicate with it during its trip. We have the deep space relays that need to go around Kerbin. We have another TDRS that needs to go around Kerbin, and then by then we'll be ready. Now, back here, you can see that we're starting to pick up some velocity. Ha, there we go. Just keep on burning, burning, burning until that finally gets its escape velocity, and there it goes. Now I need to scroll out here a little bit and target Duna so that I can get an idea of exactly how close we're coming. We keep pushing that out, just going until we start to see the close approach. And after that, it's easy does it, gentle on the throttle until finally it intercepts. Boom, right there. So now we're just going to let this go until it gets out there far enough away to pass that SOI, and then I'll take another look at it, but that's going to be in a few days. Until then, let's just double check here. Yep, the TDRS is communicating with it, so it's all good. I'll just deploy the solar panels here for its long journey, and if you're going to say, why don't you use an action group on that? Well, it's because, I've said before, sometimes I just like to click on things and enjoy playing with the toys that I've built, and clicking the buttons is playing with it, so that's what I'm doing. Now why don't we go take a look at this one in the VAB? What say you? Alrighty, this one uses a 2.5 meter and the Centaur as well. So we'll move up here. Oh, let's get that off there first. All right, open that up. Okay, so inside here we can see, what did I use the fairing as the base? Can't remember what I used for my root node on this one. Oh, no matter. I'll take that off and we can see in here what this is it's 2 satellites side by side. Look at that. 2 decouplers, 2 satellites, duplicates of each other that rise up here, and you can see there they've got all the same components. They're going to be used for the 2 opposite sides of Duna. We're going to get them there on the same launch. So at the top, they have their big dishes that are going to point back to Kerbin, which are on hinges, allowing me to roleplay that I can point the dish back toward Kerbin however I want to do it. They were extended up here a little bit on these struts so that, well, actually, let me back it up just a second so you can see here what I was doing was keeping the center of mass. Because if I had this thing turned so that it was out sideways, right, it would have poked through the side of the fairing as well, and so that's why I had them in pointed toward each other. Plus it keeps the centers of mass closer to the middle of the rocket as well by having them over here like this. Anyway, that's why they were sticking up here on these things, because they started off like that and I didn't want them clipping. So now we can see in here I've put 4 different CPUs. We have one CPU that will help me communicate with the big dish, and then we have 3 more in here for these 3 other dishes. So we got 1, 2, 3. 3. And what are those going to be used for? Well, let's see here. We have one of those is going to point at the other dish, or other satellite. So one on each will point at each other, and one will point at Ike in case I ever have anything around Ike, and the last one will point in toward Duna itself. And down here you can see that we have our regular communications, we got our antenna communications, little gyroscopes to help stabilize with the attached solar panels on those, running their power up and into the whole system that way. Little monopropellant, our RCS, fuel, little engines down here. And then this special thing that I just added, a new part that's a bi-coupler. It doesn't actually decouple, it just allows me to attach things. I think technically what this thing is supposed to be used for is, imagine putting it on the bottom of a rocket and you could stick a couple engines on here and it's supposed to look like fuel is running through there, but it works just as well if I want to flip it upside down and put it here to attach a couple pieces to it, like I did where I put the 2 satellites on there, and I just had to add my own decouplers here and here in order to make that work as a decoupler. Pretty simple. Okay, so the Duna outer relay satellites are now on their way. We have 1 TDRS satellite up. We'll launch another one pretty soon. We need 2 of the longer range deep space communication satellites that are going to orbit around the sun at the same altitude as Kerbin itself orbits. And this is the first one of those. This is going to look a little bit like a TDRS satellite, but it doesn't really need to do the same things that a TDRS does. So it doesn't, for example, have an antenna on it. There's nothing to communicate within 5 million meters of one of these, so I don't have any antenna whatsoever. Now that turned out to be somewhat of a slight problem when trying to launch it, because if you launch something with no antenna on board, then this is what happens. You throttle it up to full, you hit stage, and it goes about 10 meters, comes down, and lets you know the mistake that you've made in a most explosive fashion. So now these deep space CommSats, even though they look like TDRSs, they don't have the antenna, and so I put into my installation this new part that I'm calling the inline avionics ring, and you can see one right there. So what I've done is taken a normal lower stage, a 2.5 meter lower stage here, and I've attached this avionics ring, which I've put in 3 different sizes, the 1, the 2, and the 3. And those can now act for stages when I'm not going to have a Minotaur or a Centaur for my upper stage. Those will act as the ability to communicate with that launch, and just by putting antennas on those. And you can see it's got some cool stats in here, like it's built-in radiators and signal processors, built-in mech Jeb and command and all that. So that's what those lower stages will be commanded with. So now, if we work our way up in here, we can see the deep space communication satellite actually looks a bit like an old-time, early model TDRS satellite. It'll simply be a couple of these right here, these communications dishes. When they extend on those servos will end up looking like that, and then your basic solar panels on there, and the gyros and communication CPUs and attitude control, some radiators on the side, the mono with the spherical versions down on the bottom, slightly bigger engine than what I've been using sometimes. A lot of times I'll use this engine for a satellite, but on this one I want the more power so that I can maneuver quicker out there. And then two of the FT220 fuel tanks instead of one. Most of my satellites, if they have any fuel on them at all, they use just one of these. I have two of them because I'm going to need to do a much greater or a deep space maneuver in order to get myself into position to have them on those Kerbin orbits instead of whatever they might have been if they had been around Kerbin. It's going to take a lot more fuel to get them into position. But now with that avionics ring I just described on there, we're able to get it to launch. Partway up, probably by now, I can't remember when I did it, but probably by now I've actually activated the short-range antenna that's on the side of that avionics ring, and that's allowing me to have this a little bit of control that I'm going to need while we're still here above Kerbin, close enough to actually communicate with our TDRS satellites. Speaking of which, I just swapped over to it. I'm not actually showing me doing it. Instead, I'm showing you the deployment of the satellite, but I just swapped over to the TDRS satellite, pointed its dish at this so that when I decoupled right there, I'd actually have communications. So now we're in business. We're about to power up the main engine on this little baby, and it's going to start pushing its way out to its escape orbit. This is the deep space comm that's going to go behind Kerbin, basically, and so that's why I'm going in toward the sun right here. This orbit will take me around the sun and back to Kerbin's orbit quicker than Kerbin is going to make it. Wait, I just said behind? No, I meant in front. Because we're going to be coming around quicker than Kerbin's orbit, we're going to be in front of Kerbin when we get here. That maneuver node you just saw me setting up back there was so that I'd be able to know when I was actually back in the right spot, because I'm using Kerbal Alarm Clock, and it'll wake up and yell at me and say, "Hey, you need to take a look at this right now." Although I think it'll sound a lot less like Bane than it does right now when I try to mimic it. In fact, I highly suspect that it won't be using any words whatsoever when it pops up and yells at me, but I think you get the idea. Anyway, so you can see there that we have our communications link all set up, and now it's just a matter of waiting. We need to wait until we leave the SOI, and so in the meantime, why don't we go and launch another one? We need TDRS-D 2, because there are going to be 2 TDRS satellites pointing out at those deep space comm satellites. That's why we had the 2 dishes on each one of them for 2 comms and 2 TDRSs. So we're going to launch ourselves here, this other TDRS, which is going to go on the opposite side of Kerbin, just like was originally planned way back in episode 1, or whenever I did it. It was probably episode 1. What I really remember was that was the one where I had been trying to use Kerbulator, but I had entered the wrong formula. And so I was looking at that thinking that I had the right orbital period, and I didn't, and it got me all offset, and it wasn't going around the same time that it was supposed to. It wasn't 6 hours, it was like 5 hours and 55 minutes, and that threw everything off. And we had to send that third one up there, the orbital spare, which, by the way, we're going to keep one of the existing TDRS satellites as an orbital spare rather than launching 3 of the TDRS-D ones, but we'll be okay, I think, because we do essentially have a backup as far as the deep space comm goes, since there's 2 of them communicating with each deep space comm. So that's essentially backup right there. Now, we need to go to the opposite side of Kerbin from the TDRS-D1, and that's what you're seeing here. I'm pushing that orbit out to meet. You can see the close approach markers are letting me know that that's where they're going to be when they hit the orbit, and that's perfect. That's exactly where I want it. So a slight maneuver here at the ascending node and getting ourselves into to that proper inclination, followed by going all the way out to apoapsis, and then burning out to make the orbit just right, like Goldilocks's porridge. Actual deployment could have gone a little smoother. You see I kind of overshot where I wanted my stuff there. Just backed it off a little bit using those servo controls and then activating everything else by hand because it's fun. Powering up the Centaur and finishing out that orbit. So now we have both TDRS satellites, both deep space comms. Wait a second. I just realized I have not shown you the second deep space comm launch, have I? And I actually technically already did that one. Oops! Okay, well, I screwed up the video a little bit. Things are a little bit out of order. However, I can go take care of that right now. Right as soon as I show what happened to the Centaur that got this TDRS-D2 into position, once it was far enough away from the satellite, I powered it up and I started it going out toward its graveyard orbit. Or at least that's what I thought I was going to do. I think I'm going to have to blame it on the fact that I've had the flu for the last week, and the last 2 episodes I've actually been making while I had the flu here, so that's why I've sounded a little hoarse, I think. Yeah, anyway, I was boosting up the orbit to try and make it go out, and then I realized I just totally overdid the fuel, so why don't we just use that fuel to bring it back down instead? I'm also going to blame on the flu the fact that I didn't show you this launch yet. So you see, I was just waiting for the orbit to come around, where right when we hit that dark side terminator, I decided that seems like a good place to launch in order to get a rocket heading in the same general direction as Duna. So that's what I'm doing. Technically, this was in the past, but just wave your hands around and pretend I'm saying to you in my best Jedi, nothing to see here sort of way, you know, that there's nothing to see here. This is, oh, in fact, there's another nothing to see here. I certainly didn't flip the rocket out. You've never seen me do that before, and you'll never see me do that again. Never seen it, nothing to see here. This whole episode has been perfect. Everything was laid out in the right order. The launches were not out of order. Nothing ever went wrong. You're going to go down into the comments and you're going to say, this episode was perfect. Thumbs up. And then you're gonna click on the like button and tell all your friends that this was much better than Cats. You'd go back to see it again and again. Now when I snap my fingers, you're going to be wide awake and feeling happy about having watched my episode. Okay, and so like I was saying, we're just finishing up with our Duna, well, partial Duna direction orbit there. It only went about 1/3 to maybe 1/2 of the way to Duna, and that way it'll go around and come back and intercept the orbit where it left from here on Kerbin, at which point we will recircularize but be... Okay, I'm forgetting again from this stupid flu. Is that in front or behind? We'll be slower, so we'll be behind. Kerbin will be in front of us, and we'll be behind. Now it's time to test out the new Kethane drill. I have just added this part to my install. I want to check its various characteristics, like its mass and its drilling power, its power consumption, and its deployment angle, and just everything about it there. And now I need to go and add some landing legs to the whole thing so that we can actually start making a lander that we can test on the moon. I will just have to figure out how to get enough power to make that work. Chances are what I'll be doing is I'll just use this, where is it here? Here it is, the Kethane generator. So if we land on a Kethane deposit, we should be able to just strap one of these Kethane generators onto our whole system as well, and that will provide plenty of actual energy in order to power the whole base, including the drill itself. I'll probably want some sort of backup because, once again, Bill wants backup for everything. He's going to want maybe 2 generators, a primary and a backup generator. He's going to want a solar array that has enough power to actually provide drill potential here, even if it means we're going to temporarily shut down other systems in order to make something like that work. he's at least going to want that. Now you can see I do have that other drill in here, but I'm not going to use that one. I think I'm going to take it back out of my installation. The reason is I think it's just a little too easy to use that one. If you were using this drill right here in order to do all the drilling, all you'd have to do is run the game a little faster, and then you could get away with just one of these drills and it would do everything you need in the whole game. I like the idea that this one here being so big like it is, that maybe that's what's required to get that large drill down deep enough to actually extract that precious Kethane from the surface, or from under the surface, really, from deep down below. This one, I don't know, it just seems a little bit too small, a little too easy. Look, it doesn't even go, it's not even touching the ground here. That's how far it would go. This one, you know, this thing, if it's landed on the ground like that, sure, it's going to look like it's in there, but this one, you just really get the sense that that's a drill. Ah, that's a drill. So that's the one I'm going to use, and I'm going to take this one back out of the install. Alright, Kerbinauts, that's going to do it for this time. We will get one of these things built into a lander, and I'll add some landing legs next time on Project Odyssey. Until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts. Oh, wait a second. I know what this needs.